Good afternoon. My name is Bill Cleary. Yes, I'm so grateful to be here in Bavaria with such a nice audience. I've been talking to students this week. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Sperber. I'd like to acknowledge Peter Schmieder for inviting me here. He's been a long time colleague of ours at Santa Clara University. He's a great guy. He got Deggendorf interested and involved with Santa Clara University, which is at the core of Silicon Valley. And I'd also like to acknowledge distinguished guests. Lord Mayor Meyer is here. I'd like to acknowledge all the great faculty that have done such a wonderful job with these students. And I'd like to acknowledge the professors who've worked really hard to get you through the program, and also to acknowledge the parents of the students. And I'd like to just take a moment, because this is kind of a California tradition. Could you just reach over to your parents and your friends and thank them right now for putting up with you for the last few years and getting you through this? Just thank them right now. Just take a moment and say, hey, thanks. Could you do that? Yeah, we sometimes forget what's really important. You know, we talk about change and change with technology. You know, I have 3 sons, and my middle son, Ian, I used to talk to him about this, and I'd say, you know, Ian, I have more in common with George Washington because of the technological changes that have happened in the last 30, 40 years than I do with you. I said, you grew up with an Apple computer, you got an iPhone. I had to buy CDs and cassettes, and you just downloaded what you wanted for 99 cents. I said, I didn't have the advantages that you have. I said, you are living in an age where technology has literally transformed everything that you do. The way you learn, the way you entertain yourself, you know, the way you go to the doctor and make appointments. Everything has changed. And he said to me, you know, I don't know. He told me a few weeks ago, he said, you know, Dad, when I was young, I used to think you were kind of dumb with some of the stuff you would say, not very smart. But he said, you know, when I turned 23, I realized, I said, hey, you're a pretty smart guy. You've really gotten smart in the last 10 years. How'd that happen? And that's paraphrasing Mark Twain, who said that about his own dad. But lots and lots of change has gone on here, and you can see it in this university. I can feel it. And you guys are adjusting to change as much as we are at Santa Clara University. You know, some of the changes that have happened, I read a book when I was young. How many of, I don't know if you've ever heard of Alvin Toffler. He wrote a book called Future Shock. And when I was in college, kind of like you guys right now, I read that same book. And he was talking about eugenics, and he was talking about some of the changes in transportation, and he was talking about some of the changes in medicine. But nobody ever envisioned what would transpire, you know, in the last 30, 40-odd years. Since the time I was working with Apple, things have changed. We had a simple computer. You know, we launched the Macintosh, simple 64K computer with a printer that cost $10,000 that nobody could afford, and Mac Write and Mac Paint. Not much more beyond that, you know. So we launched that out there, and it failed miserably initially. It took a long time for it to actually succeed with the advent of a software package called PageMaker and Quark Express in desktop publishing. So things don't always happen the way we plan them to. But if you look at education, back at Santa Clara Valley, we never envisioned a time where we would have remote access learning. We have universities coming to Silicon Valley from all over the world now, from Harvard, from Wharton School of Business. They're coming into Silicon Valley because they can actually train students and train MBAs and train people in business and engineering without even being present physically 100% of the time. You know, the campus itself, the physical plant, is no longer necessary completely. I mean, you could actually have a Deggendorf University, and maybe the president might consider that. Peter, you might consider having a Deggendorf University right in the heart of Silicon Valley. At least now you're aligned and you have an association. But every aspect of our lives, the way politics are conducted, I mean, you've seen what just happened in America. There's a guy that got elected with just Twitter. This Mr. Donald Trump, did you hear of him? I mean, that's an amazing technological breakthrough. I have a guy with a Twitter account taking on the mass media and whatnot and being able to communicate a message, whether you like him or hate him. That's pretty remarkable. That's change. So politics. Entertainment. When Steve Jobs started out with Apple, he never envisioned that he'd buy, after he got fired from Apple, a company called Pixar. And that Pixar would become the most important thing that ever happened to the Disney Corporation because it revolutionized animation. When Steve Jobs came back to Apple, he never envisioned that he'd create something as remarkable as the iPhone, which made it real easy. I mean, smartphones really became smart. Before they had the iPhone, it was pretty difficult to use one of these devices. So you had all this power of computing in this small little device. So even medicine, we have robotics. And I toured with your engineering group the other day. I was in one of the labs and looking at the robotics and the mechanical engineering students involved there. You know, my son works at Tesla now, and at Tesla the entire plant is robotics in Fremont, California. The whole thing has been transformed. So every aspect, we have artificial intelligence now. They're going to put it in an iPhone, so you'll be able to literally say to Siri, if you know who Siri is, make me an appointment for a nice Bavarian dinner here, actually in Munich, and tell my wife I'll be late. And all of that information, because of artificial intelligence, it won't be just Siri mapping out something for you, but she'll actually be interacting with you. That's a marvelous change. That's a remarkable change. That's going to make men especially more efficient. You know how men have difficulty now walking and chewing gum? Well, in the future, men are going to be able to multitask just like women. And we all know that women are the smarter of between the two sexes, right? They can do 20 things at once. Well, men will be able to almost, but not quite, be as good as women. So these changes are happening in real time, and I thought for the students especially today, I'll tell you a little bit about how I dealt with change, because change is a constant. It's inevitable. We're going to see change ongoing for the next 30, 40, 50 years, many decades ahead. And in my life, I've gone through many transitions, and I've sought opportunities where I saw them. And I want to inspire you not to be afraid of change, to embrace change, and to really seek it out, and to be tolerant of ambiguity. I know in Bavaria, some of the students are telling me, yeah, but we don't like change so much. We want to get a job at BMW, have a nice career, not too many changes. You know, we want things set in stone. We want to plan ahead. Well, that doesn't always work out that way because change is inevitable. You might have a different kind of BMW in 10 years. I'm sure you will. So what jobs are available for you? What opportunities are available for you? I'll just tell you from my own personal history. You know, I grew up in a place called Brooklyn, New York, and I moved to Long Island later on. And all of my family members were teachers, history teachers, science teachers. Some of them were nuns. One was a math teacher. She was a sister of St. Joseph. They were they pursued education. I actually had 4 aunts that started the Cleary School for the Deaf on Long Island. It was for deaf children, special education. So the entire family was about being a teacher. So I thought, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to go and pursue a career in education. So I did. I went to college on Long Island for a few years, and then I went up to State University College in Buffalo and got my teaching credentials and my bachelor's degree, just like you guys today. From that, I did a master's. I started out with a bachelor's in anthropology and history, then a master's in anthropology, and then I even started working on my doctorate so I could teach. And I started out, and I was a pretty decent teacher. I loved it. I felt real passionate about teaching. And I think that's the important word here for you as you go out and pursue a career, and that's passion. You should do what you really love. If you're getting up in the morning, right, and you're getting in your Tesla or your BMW or your Volkswagen, and you're heading off to work, and you don't feel passion, you don't feel excited, maybe it's time to take a look at other options. And that's the way I've always governed my life. So when I was a teacher, I had a great time, I really enjoyed it. But then somehow, in the summer when I had extra time and lots of energy because I was young back then, I decided, wow, I should do something. I have a fairly good knack for writing. So I started writing, and I started writing for beer companies, and I started writing for soda companies and ski resorts and a builder called Ryan Holmes. I would write copy in the summer. The next thing I knew, I had a job offer from an ad agency in New York. And I'm saying, how can I go from being an anthropologist, right, studying culture, archaeology, paleoanthropology? What does early predation amongst Australopithecines in the sub-Saharan Veld have to do with marketing? For those of you who've studied paleoanthropology, it's a little bit biology, it's a study of human nature, right? So I'm saying, well, wait a second, that's what it has to do with. It has to do with human nature. Maybe there's a place for me in marketing. So I went off, started working in New York, and I was very naive. I got involved in the advertising business. I had one client, Welsh Foods, and they made Welch's jelly. It's like jam, right? Welch's jelly. And they asked me, they said, they were really philosophical. They're sitting around the table, and they said, what is Welch's grape jelly? They posed that question to me, the philosophical question of the century. And I said, I think it's a lubricant for peanut butter. And they looked at me and they said, that's brilliant. And I go, no, it's not. And I realized then that I wasn't feeling excited and passion. And I was reading through the Time magazine, and there was a young guy in California, and he had an apple on the top of his head, a guy by the name of Steve Jobs. And I said, now that looks interesting. The marketing of personal computers where you actually can change the world. Now that's really exciting. I used to be an educator. What would be the application of personal computers if you could put them on the desk of every single student in California? No, in the world. Now, what would that do to transform and make us better citizens, better people, more insightful, facilitate greater education sooner? How would that work out for people? So that was very attractive to me. Next thing I knew, I flew out to California. I got an interview, and I interviewed with a gentleman who eventually hired me. But I got to meet Steve Jobs, and he looked at my resume, and he said, I noticed you have a background in anthropology. And I said, that's right. And he said, that's good. We don't have any anthropologists here. We probably could use one. And I said, wow, this is a cool company. Because I said, this guy is either a knucklehead, he's crazy, or he's the smartest guy on the planet. Because I'd never come across anybody. But back in New York, you know, it was kind of like living in London. Everything was regimented. You had to go by the book. You had to go to Harvard and get an MBA. Or you went to Wharton and you got your MBA. But nobody would ever hire an anthropologist in an up-and-coming company back in New York. And that's probably why they lost the election. They weren't thinking out of the box, right? They weren't thinking about where things are going. There's a famous quote that Steve Jobs used to love to use from Wayne Gretzky. You know, Wayne Gretzky is a very famous hockey player, right? Played for the Kings and whatnot in LA. Real famous guy. And Jobs used to say, I like Wayne Gretzky, because Wayne Gretzky said, I don't care where the puck is. You know, the little hockey puck. I care where the puck is going. See the difference? And that's Steve Jobs. That's how he thought. He wanted to see where things were going. So here I am, a teacher. The first time I show up at Apple, I'm in a suit. I'm wearing a tie. By the way, this is the first one I've worn in about 5 years. In due respect to all the people here in Bavaria, I know you guys like ties. So I'm wearing a tie, I'm wearing a suit, and I'm there and I'm going, geez. And people are making fun of me because guys are walking by carrying skateboards, they're in shorts, they're in T-shirts, and I go, oh, I might have made a mistake here. These people, I don't know if they know what they're doing. There's no adult supervision here whatsoever. Because I had this New York mindset. I had this more conservative view of how to run a business, right? So I'm in there, and they're prancing about, and the first Halloween was a real shocker for me because everybody dressed up as devils and pirates and some other weird costumes and ghosts, and they're walking around in a parade showing everybody their costumes, and it was kind of a fun environment. I said, well, you have to admit this place is a lot of fun. And true to Bavarian tradition, they had beer days. Every Friday was Oktoberfest at Apple Computer. Huge beer trucks would pull up. And after a hard week of working, boy, that was great. In the hot California sun, you know, it's 90 degrees, you're in shorts, you worked 14 hours a day, 5 days in a row, and there come the beer trucks. And that's a true story. So again, all of a sudden, I'm starting to really feel passion for the job I have. I'm feeling really good. And I want you to get that sense that there are jobs out there, there are professions, and there are opportunities for young entrepreneurs. And we've been talking about that all this week, for you to go out there and make a difference in this world. Because every time a job is reduced or goes away because of a technological breakthrough, like, for example, Uber replaces all the cab drivers in New York City, right? Airbnb replaces a lot of realtors that used to rent properties, right? Things like the iPod and the Apple Store, where you can buy one record or one tune for 99 cents, you don't have to buy the whole album, creates a whole new set of opportunities. So everything that goes away, something new comes along. This week, I pointed out to our Bavarian students and students from all over Germany, I pointed out that there was a guy, I think it was around the 1500s sometime, by the name of Gutenberg. And he created a simple device, a simple technological breakthrough that had massive unintended consequences. And this is the way I want you students to think. Massive unintended consequences. Because that printing press from Gutenberg, right? All of a sudden, people now had a reason to become literate. Because prior to the Gutenberg printing press, you know, who would be the most literate people in the community? The politicians, maybe? Yes. But also the priests and the ecclesiastical class, the bishops, because they read the Bible, they read in Latin, everything was in Latin. During the time here in Bavaria of the Holy Roman Empire, everything was in Latin, the documents were in Latin, but all of a sudden, now, for the first time, people in Europe, in Germany, all over, in Bavaria, I shouldn't say Germany because it was just Bavaria back then. And Bavaria is the best province, isn't it? Hey, tell me if I'm wrong. Is not Bavaria kind of the California of Germany? It's the coolest place, right? That's what I thought. So the unintended consequences here, right, of having this technological breakthrough of monumental proportions, the printing press, it would bring on mass literacy. And guess what? With mass literacy, you have challenges, you have change. And with mass literacy, you have what's called the Age of Enlightenment. You have the Reformation happening at this time as well. You have all kinds of changes that are going on for the first time in Europe, which eventually impact the world. In fact, the Age of Enlightenment impacts the United States, which wasn't the United States. We're a British colony, right? You guys know what it's like living next to the British. It's tough. They had a king by the name of George III, and he wasn't the brightest bulb. And he was telling all these American colonists that were not just from America. A lot of those people that first came over were from Germany. They were from all over the world. The Germans settled in Pennsylvania. The Catholics settled in Maryland, right? The Puritans, those crazy guys that think everything is dirty, they settled in Massachusetts Bay Colony. They were the first pilgrims. So all over, you had these colonies with really smart people, but they had a king. With the Age of Enlightenment, a guy by the name of Thomas Paine wrote a book called Common Sense. And in the book Common Sense, he said, hey, it's not a good idea if you live in America, right, this continent, and you have to pay taxes to a king who's 4,000 miles away. He really doesn't care about you guys, and he's really not letting you have a voice. And he was chosen, by the way, through divine right monarchy by God. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, people start questioning things, and we had a revolution. And that revolution spread to all places, France, right? They had a revolution. And eventually, Europe had one by one revolutions. Bismarck, I learned the other day, Bismarck, was it in 1871, unified Germany, right? Brought all these different provinces, Prussia, Bavaria, all together in one unified country. It was the Second Reich, right? Okay, so that comes together. Change is inevitable. It's inevitable politically, but do you see the connection between a technological breakthrough like a printing press and the unintended consequences politically, socially, economically? It has enormous ramifications, and that's what I see with the internet. Which brings me to my next phase of my life. After Apple and had a successful career, we launched the Apple IIe and the IIc. I started my own company. It started out as just Cleary Communications, then it became CKS, Cleary, Kwame, and Suter. And my partners, Tom Suter was the guy that did all the Apple identity work and the logo. My other partner was a technology guy, an engineer. And I was a marketing guy. The three of us together created a company, and what we did right that enabled us to eventually file for a public offering to go public and to make some decent money at it, we basically were the first guys to develop websites. The very first guys. And we developed websites for MCI, Mercedes-Benz. When you go to your BMW site, we developed the software where you could change the colors of the cars. You could do a little spreadsheet, and if you put this amount down, this is what your monthly payments would be. You could play with the interior design of the car and see what color you want the seats to be. All of that stuff started with a real simple idea. But all of a sudden, websites became everywhere. Ubiquitous is the word in English. They were just, everybody adopted websites. We had initially people coming to us and saying, well, I can't do a website with you because we're General Motors, and we noticed that you're working with Audi, and Audi was one of our biggest clients. And I said, well, okay, I understand. And then 2 weeks later, when they realized that nobody else could do websites, they'd call us back, and they'd say, we want to hire you guys to do a website. So if you have an idea, and that idea becomes indispensable, and other businesses need that idea to succeed, then you have a successful franchise, a successful business. But having said all of this, yeah, we had a good effect on our first clients were eBay, Amazon, Yahoo, Excite, AdForce, all of these client names that you now know as household words because we not only did their websites, we did their advertising, we made movies. CKS became a marketing powerhouse in Silicon Valley in the 90s. And in doing that, we kind of changed a lot of things. But we maintained a relationship with Apple, and we also maintained a relationship with Steve Jobs. So we did all the work, all the marketing work for Next and for Pixar. That relationship was probably the most profound thing for me personally in my life because I learned so much from this guy. And this is the message that I think I'd like to share with you today. And as you go forward, and as you pursue careers, and as you think about what you want to do for the rest of your life. But remember this, the average person in the United States now, they predict, is going to change careers 3 or 4 times in their lives. So you may start out right, as an engineer, and you might wind up being the CEO of a company. Or you might become a stand-up comic for all I know, right? You could go in so many different directions. You might develop the next big idea in the medical field. And that's because the potential is there. The opportunities are there. So, what did I learn and what do I want to pass on to you? I'd like to say that first off, we're in the second industrial revolution. We can see the signs are everywhere. Robotics, artificial intelligence, the technology changes that are impacting the medical field, that are impacting education, every aspect of our lives. So we're in the midst of this thing now. You know, in 1790, 95% of Americans lived on farms. By the early 1820s, things were changing so rapidly. People were moving to cities. Why? Because they developed ways of assembling things and of manufacturing things very quickly. So there all of a sudden you have a major transformation. It's called the Industrial Revolution. It was so bad in America and so intense, it caused a civil war. And you say, no, I thought slavery caused a civil war. That was part of it. The other part was the industrialized North versus the agrarian or agricultural South trying to maintain itself. Technology is changing at a rapid pace. You need to embrace those changes. You need to say, you know what? Let's continue. Let's move forward. Change is a good thing. You need to learn to be tolerant of ambiguity. Change is good. Ambiguity is good. Most of all, as you sit here today, you need to find out inside of you, what is your passion? What do you love? And you need to pursue that. You need to doggedly go after that, whatever that is. That's something. And you may start out, hey, when I was 19 years old and I was in college, I was a bartender. I had no idea I'd wind up at a leading computer company. Had no idea when I was in college. But I always knew that I was moved by what moved me in terms of my internal passion, what I felt good about, what I felt strong about. And that's what I would tell you here today. You know, there's a famous American president, and I'll close on a famous quote, and I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. And that famous American president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he once said, and he was addressing the American people, there is nothing to fear but fear itself. And I would tell you, students, there's nothing to fear. And I'd also tell the faculty, for this university to continue to be a great university, you, as professors, have to adapt to change, and you have to embrace the future aggressively. You have to fall in love with the future, and not just, you know, with the words, but actions speak louder than words. And on that note, I'd like to ask one more thing, one more favor. Now, reach over, look at your parents, and give them a big hug right now, because they've put up with a lot to get you to this point. Give your parents and your friends that supported you a big hug. Are you allowed to do that in Germany? So right now, let's do that. Let's all hug our parents. Big hugs. Come on, those are little baby hugs. Thank you, Papa. Thank you, Mama. Thank you, little sisters and brothers. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so on that note, I'll just say thank you. It's a pleasure being here. I want to thank Peter. I want to thank the school for having me here today. I've had a wonderful week, and there's nothing like, and I'm going to take it back to Santa Clara, Bavarian hospitality. And the food is great. The beer is good. It's a great place to be. It is the California of Germany. Thank you very much.